we did spirit photography, and okay, so the origins. So what is it? It's pictures of people with spirits, and it began in the mid-1800s with the rise of cameras. People started experimenting, basically right on par with the creation of the camera. People started experimenting with what they could do with images. It actually started in America with this guy, William Mumler, who was from the Northeast, I think Massachusetts. One day he took a self-portrait of himself, and he found this picture, and when he produced it, he found this picture of his cousin who had been dead for 12 years. And basically the idea is that it was from double exposure. He had a lens that had a picture of her on it, and so he experimented more with it, and he developed this technique, and he sold it to the masses. And people really caught on to the idea because they could remember, if they had an image that they of like one of their brothers or sons who died in the Civil War, that was the way to remember them, they believed. And so after the Civil War, it really started to grow, and then it reached its peak after World War I when it spread globally and people started to recognize the method. Okay, so this is just more about William Elmer. He was technically the first spirit photographer. He used double exposure. His most famous image, which is on the next slide, is of Mary Todd Lincoln. She came in, and her image is there with the spirit of Abraham Lincoln behind her. And also, Mumler was eventually put on trial for fraud because there were a lot of people who just didn't believe in the method. They thought it was all hoax. And there were a lot of reasons. Mumler was kind of a shady guy. He was even, there were even rumors that he would break into people's houses to steal pictures to use as spirits. And so his downfall kind of foreshadows the entire downfall of the media because it just was exposed for being a kind of fake, gimmicky thing. And so how it's done is it's double exposure mainly, which is you have one lens with one picture and then another lens, and you take the picture, and it comes out where you have both. And then also what developed afterwards was when people were trying to cut costs, or maybe they didn't have the right equipment, was they would do a movement during the capture. So you would have two people in the image, and then you would start to take the picture, and then someone would leave. And so that's this picture right here is like almost like a family picture taken. It's supposed to be a devil there. And it was just a movement during capture. They had somebody dress up and then move, and so it's kind of a riff on the actual spirit photography. And that's Mary Todd Lincoln there.
Yeah, so there was a common belief that photographs revealed aspects that were invisible to like our eyes by themselves. And there's like a few other things I could talk about on like the next slide where they took like different interpretations of it. One was like fluidic photography, where it was like the photograph captures your fluidic energies, your soul basically. And there was another form that basically was like thought photography or thoughtography, where like they tried to capture like whatever you were thinking in your dreams or your thoughts, whatever you were thinking about. And in one of his articles, Tom Gunning talked about the difference between still and moving images. So he said like one reason, it's not just double exposure that people use for spirit photography, they also use like after images. So lots of optical toys play with after images because of the five phenomenon and like the persistence of vision. Like what we normally consider as defects or like problems with the eye, not able to like register like the changes in image, like it perceives like progressing still images as motion. That's just something that our eyes do. But he said that that's not like a defect, and it's like a very real part of like who we are and how we like experience the world in a more complete way. So though these like spirit photography and like other images are like kind of ephemeral because they kind of flicker and they don't really like appear at first sight, like they're still a very real part. They're just as real as a stationary image. That's what he was saying. So the first picture there is fluidic energies, photography is des effluves, and the other one is photo de la pensée, like thought photography. This one was like a walking stick. That was the supposed dream that he was trying to capture from the person. Other ones were like the planetary system, like the solar system. It was all very abstract, but that was like a very popular idea at the time, like just trying to capture things that we couldn't see by ourselves.
Alright, so the idea of spirit photography ended up even catching the attention of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Houdini. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a Ghost Club member, and the Ghost Club was thought to be the oldest paranormal investigation and research group in the world, which was also founded in 1862. And he was also vice president for the Society of like research. Houdini was also, like as we know, a world-renowned illusionist. So Conan Doyle believed that Houdini had possessed like supernatural powers to be able to do the performances that he did. But Houdini claimed that all his performances were due to physical training and just his use of illusions. Doyle also believed and supported spirit photography, and he said it was possible that spirits could show up in these photographs, but Houdini called it all a hoax, and the argument blew up and it ended up in newspapers. So from a media archaeological perspective, as was mentioned earlier, spirit photography started around the rise of cameras and photographs, and as cameras and photographs became more common, like so did spirit photography. And at first, photographers were just testing new effects like stereoscopic images and double exposure, and some realized that they could use these effects for their own benefit and charge a lot for it. So spirit photography was expensive, mostly for people who had money or mostly for people who were wealthy, and that could have led to its downfall.
Yeah, so the decline of the medium, following World War I, there were a lot of different factors that went into this. One of them was the end of the spiritualist movement. This was, at the time, mid-1800s, there was a real interest in the occult, in spirits and stuff, and this ended after World War I, and so there wasn't as much interest or time spent on aspects of that. Also, like with the Houdini Doyle debate, as well as Mumler's trial, and all the other like cheap replicas at the time, I think people just started to understand that this is not really real, and they were charging $10 per picture, which was a lot back then, and so the trend died fairly quickly after World War I.
So today we have some remnants of, I guess you could say remnants of spirit photography. It's I think it's most prevalent in like ghost hunting. There's like 3D mapping cameras, thermal imaging, and like laser grids. And there's some pictures on the next slide, but just like these different techniques that ghost hunters use, it like shows something that you can't immediately spot with your own eyes, like whether it's different infrared sensing or like minute shifts in like the environment around you. Like these methods capture that in like some of the ways that spirit photography tried to but didn't exactly succeed in. There's different haunted houses like Phantom Manor in Disneyland Paris. Horror movies, they have like common phenomenon, like you open a mirror cabinet, close it, there's like something behind you, like a ghostly apparition, something comes out of the television, like just the existence of spirits around you, showing their faces, out of photographs, that sort of thing. Different historians and authors have written about the phenomenon as well, apparitions in general. There's art exhibits, and with Photoshop, it's even, like it's easier than ever to like create your own spirit photographs and like add a ghostly element to things like that. So the first image is thermal imaging. So it's like the heat layers sent or like indicated there would be like a person there sitting on the couch, but there's nothing there, so it's like a ghostly sort of thing. The other one is a laser grid. It like shows the shifts. Yeah.
But in Milliker's photos, the spirit always appears. He uses a glass plate and a camera with a lens from the 1860s to mimic Mumler's photos. Milliker says there are several ways Mumler may have created his images, including using a double exposure.
Taking a photograph of someone, putting the lens cap on, adding someone, and then taking the lens cap back off again. This creates a look of anything behind the removed sitter coming through and it gives them a nice ghostly appearance.
Miller develops his photos the same way Mamba did, using a wet plate collodion process that produces a negative image on transparent glass. Visitors are fascinated by the result.
So yeah, modern spirit photographs, like people get them for like engagement pictures, just something to like add a unique twist to any normal photograph that they have. It's a novelty nowadays.
So for one of our revivals, while we were researching, we found out there are like spirits at Tech 2. So one of the spirits that we learned about was Lyman Hall. Lyman Hall was Tech's second president, and during his tenure, he fell sick, and then he ended up passing away. So it said that around the building that he was named after, Lyman Hall, which is actually pretty close to here, like it's up that street. It said that the spirit says like to hang around the building. So you can see in the top left, you can see the spirit of Lyman Hall. And then there are other recreation. Spirit photography was also said to be an extension of someone's soul and someone's spirit. So in our next picture, or in this picture right here, we have a picture in the mirror. And it's kind of hard to see here, but in the slide, you can see what makes out to be Buzz, like our school mascot. So the spirit in the photograph is Buzz, and it's an extension of a Georgia Tech student's soul. And we incorporated like a modern twist to it. So we have a mirror selfie and the cliche that there's a ghost in the mirror whenever you take a picture or look back at the picture.
Guess you've got time for questions from the class. Can you please just choose whoever.
So I noticed that you guys said that a lot of this revolves around fraud, and even some of the more modern examples revolve more around like horror and spirit. It is spirit photography, but is there any examples of today where it's less about something that's more fraud? Like I know that with your recreation, you weren't necessarily saying that the spirit of Buzz haunts you, but were there any other like, more modern examples of that?
I think, well, so in the video, like, obviously the person taking the photo knows, like, they can see the exact method that the photographer is using to produce the spirit, like, because the person is stepping out of frame. Like, it's very obvious to them that it's not, like, a true ghost. But I think the honest sense that you're talking about is, like, present with, like, ghost hunting, because they, like, honestly believe in the presence of ghosts and supernatural, like, beings in their locations, and they're trying to use like deeper methods that their eyes cannot detect to perceive them. So I think that's the best example I can think of.
Yeah, and there have also been like recent art exhibits in museums in the past few years that have like been just devoted to real spirit photography. And there's definitely a group of professors and people out there that are trying to keep the medium alive through books, art exhibits, and stuff like that.
So you mentioned that kind of one of the reasons that this medium kind of went away was the decline of the spiritual movement. What would have like caused that? And then also you mentioned that it kind of got picked up today in a more lighthearted way, like in amusement parks and haunted houses and stuff like that. So would you say that like in a sense, the spirit photography has kind of arisen once again today, or is it just kind of like people don't really care about it, it's just kind of a novelty?
Well, with the first part of the spiritualist movement, I would say number one, the evidence of fraud really hurt, and like even Houdini claiming that all of his tricks were illusions, that kind of adds to the fact that maybe this isn't real. And then I think that, not sure about this, but maybe after World War I, when people I think that people might have lost interest in something like that after seeing something so horrific. Like maybe they weren't so focused on the spirits. Maybe it might have haunted them instead of interested them at that point. So that's what I would say about the first part.
Yeah, I would say that maybe not so much spirit photography is so common like nowadays, but the idea of like spiritualism, like we see films now like Paranormal Activity, stuff like that, where they're like filming spirits and they see spirit mapping and stuff like that. It's more common than just like spirit photography. So maybe not the idea of the photography itself, but the spiritualism is more common nowadays.
So back in the 1920th century, after it was revealed to be a hoax, were there still any people that still wanted spirit photography, like spirit photos, just to have photos of their dead loved ones with them, or did they completely die out because they thought it was real and they realized it wasn't?
I think that the trend continued for a while, especially because you had a lot of sellers who would make it in a different method that was much cheaper. So the families really appreciated what the photographers did. There's reports of people just going back to get several pictures just because they really enjoyed the process and the result. So I think that the evidence of fraud definitely hurt the success of serial photography, but I think the trend continued definitely, but sort of like that.
Do you think with like how much we put out there now, we could see a rise in say 40 years of people who want say selfies with their grandparents and they're photoshopped together and they pull old photos from Facebook or something? Could you see that as a future revitalization of the medium?
Well, I mean, it's definitely like if a person is willing, like they know what they want, they set up like to have it. Like Photoshop makes it easy for them to do it themselves, but if they want like an actual photographer to take care of it, it's definitely preferable that they provide like since photos are like legally available now and there's no need to like break into people's homes and like take like time-honored photos for that sort of thing. I could definitely see it being like more common now and like less looked down upon, if that's what you're asking.
So, and you used Photoshop, sorry, did you? You used Photoshop to do this, right?
Yes.
Do you think how analogous or not was your process? I mean, I understand it's fundamentally different, but do you think there's anything to be learned from the way you did it versus the way it was once done, or is it just completely transformed?
I think it's similar in the aspects that you have two different images that you're blending together. So for when we started with the Photoshop process, I started with just like the picture of myself, and then I just got a picture of Buzz, and like just blending the two images together and just trying to make it look as if Buzz was actually an actual spirit. I think it's analogous to the way that photographers back then used double exposure and had someone take a picture and then one person leave and then take the picture again.
This is kind of like unrelated, but one interesting thing I read was that was that a way to tell if like a spirit photograph is like fake is like the framing, like if a person is on like one side of the photo and they're leaving enough space next to them for another person, then you can tell it's like fake.
Right.
Because like planned it that way and it wasn't like a natural occurrence. And also, if you're interested, the spirit of Dracula is set to hang out at Ivan Allen College here.
So like you stated that people in the early like 1850s and 60s, people wanted like pictures of their family members in spirit photography. Now like I think you talked about laser photography and the heat and all that.
Oh yeah, thermal vision, thermal laser hits.
How do people use like how's it used, like those types of photography? Do people still like ask for it or?
No, that's not for like common people. That's just for like people on like the hunt for spirits and like haunted locations. That sort of, like it goes with like EMF and those other like types of technologies just for that sole purpose. I mean, there's also like some scientific applications, obviously, for like infrared sensing cameras and like laser dots or laser grids, but the general populace doesn't really have much use for it.
And I'll say, I thought the findings were very interesting. At the end of the video that we showed, in the original video, they asked the kid, like a little kid, maybe like 5 years old, like, oh, what do you think of this? And he was amazed by it. He's like, I'd never seen anything like this before, and I found that interesting. Maybe an indication that we might see a rise in it, because people might take it seriously might want something similar.
Maybe a final question is, so I scheduled this during Halloween week because we think of spirit photography as being sort of, you know, like a creepy haunting. But I'm wondering now how much that's just to do with age, you know, where we think of 19th century ghosts, because it sounds almost like it begins not with creepiness at all, but with sort of sentiment and family emotion. Does that sound right? And if so, when does it become horrific? When does it become a feature of the haunted house?
I think maybe in the revival to today, people want to make it something that it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So, because if you think about spirit photography, you would think it's something scary, and so that's sort of more interesting than, oh, this is just something sentimental. And there definitely was at the time that Mumler at first said that he couldn't figure out like why his deceased cousin showed up, and there were reports of people who just like they followed the guy through the whole process of making the photos, and they couldn't find out where he was splicing and things that shouldn't be there. So, and there are some pictures that like are rumored to be like actually real spirits, but I think that was like more very few instances of that. I think it was more sentimental.
I think it might also be like a combination of spirit photography and like phantasmagoria. Gunning mentioned that like if you're contrasting phantasmagoria to like optical toys, like optical toys sort of flaunt their like they flaunt to the open like how they work and that sort of thing. Whereas the spirit photographs and phantasmagoria are like kind of mysterious in that aspect, and like the horror might have like gotten blended into the photographs themselves, maybe.
Great, okay, thank you very much.